often imitated, but never duplicated. It's the Tomb of Horrors. Blah, 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 blah. It's 8:45 in the morning here at a small island off the coast of Costa Rica, affectionately referred to as Site B. And in the spirit of Halloween, this September 5th, 16th, the first day of the Jewish New Year, we're talking about the granddaddy, the OG, the worst dungeon ever made, Tomb of Horrors. And I'm not sure why we're talking about Tomb of Horrors other than the 50th anniversary is coming up, or maybe Wizards has secretly suggested they're revisiting it. I don't know what, but there's a couple of videos up all of a sudden about Tomb of Horrors. I am responding to a video my friend over at Driving and Dragons made about Tomb of Horrors, and he's making another one about it later today. So yeah. Now, in his video, he's responding to another video from a fellow YouTuber called Level Up to EXP to Level 3, where EXP to Level 3 talks about how Tomb of Horrors is the worst dungeon ever made because he doesn't understand what Tomb of Horrors is about. And a lot of people, when talking about Tomb of Horrors, crap on it. It's the worst dungeon ever made. It makes no sense. And it doesn't. Tomb of Horrors makes no sense unless you understand two things. Because by its very definition, if you read Tomb of Horrors without the original Tomb of Horrors, which has been reprinted dozens of times, so you have no excuse to say, I can't find a copy, because it's out there. There's hundreds and hundreds of copies of it out there. Plus, there's hundreds and hundreds of paramutations out it. I would say it is probably the second or third most revisited dungeon throughout the hobby. If you do a search on YouTube, on Google or whatever for just dungeon maps, you're going to stumble across at least 10, if not more, with names like Tomb of Death or Tomb of Annihilation or Tomb of Doom or Doom Vault or whatever. And if you look through all the published modules and published articles, you're going to find ones that say this is a, homage to Tomb of Horrors. This is inspired by Tomb of Horrors. So yeah, if we go like, which ones are the most, obviously Keep on the Borderlands is probably the most, but I would say Tomb of Horrors is the second or third most recopied. But you need to understand why the original Tomb of Horrors was made, because the original Tomb of Horrors, again, makes no sense. It is literally the classic example of a dungeon no one's heard about, a dungeon no one knows where it is, and a dungeon no one's come back from, and yet everybody knows where it is, and everybody's heard about it. And there's no reason for you to go there. It's literally introduced as you're walking down the road, and on a hill, you see some stones that are maybe in the shape of a skull. But other than that, there's on its own, there's absolutely no reason for your characters to go in there, because again, nobody told you about it. Nobody knows where it is, and no one's ever come back, except, of course, that everybody's heard of it and knows where it is. So why go there? The way it is written, if you don't read the actual introduction, why would I go there? I don't even know about it, and nobody's telling me to go there. No one's paying me to go there. So why is it? And why would I run this? Why does this exist? Well, you have to go back to the very first game con that Gygax went to. Tomb of Horrors was a tournament module, the very first tournament module. It was supposed to be run over a short time span by multiple groups, at the end of which you would tally up the number of points you got for succeeding the various tackles. That's not a sentence. And then, whoever survived would move on and move on. It was the very first tournament module. You were supposed to play pre-generated characters that were handed out at the beginning, because Tomb of Horrors was testing things like, how long could I survive? What would I do placed in this situation? How do I deal with all these traps and tricks and triggers and puzzles? It was supposed to test your mind. It was supposed to test your ability to, survive. That's why there was pre-generated characters. You weren't meant to bring in that character you loved, because there's no reason for the character you loved to go there. It was meant as a tournament. It was only when they made it starting to available that people tried to fit it into campaigns because it was so cool, even though actually it's not cool. Okay. And later on, there would be multiple arguments, multiple articles, multiple revisits of Tomb of Horrors and Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine. And then, of course, the various copies of trying to explain Tomb of Horrors and the thought behind Tomb of Horrors and why your characters would go to Tomb of Horrors. Now, I could understand people who were, started in the hobby later, maybe not knowing about Tomb of Horrors. I can understand these people who've only, these super experienced, I've been playing for decades people, but they don't really understand Tomb of Horrors. I can even understand why most 5e players would never run it or even understand it or go through it, because it doesn't make sense. And it's only if you get deep into the lore that it starts to make sense. And then, of course, there's my theory, which is reaffirmed. Now, if you've ever read Tomb of Annihilation, which, as you know, in my humble opinion, is the best 5th edition module Wizards of the Coast made. Fandelver's the best, but in my, I love Tomb of Annihilation. I love everything about Tomb of Annihilation. It comes up at least once every 3 or 4 months when I'm talking about 5e. It is the perfect D&D adventure for me. But most people don't appreciate it. But when you get to the section, when they talk about a Sarasek, they explain in detail why the Tomb of Annihilation exists, why the Tomb of Horrors exists, why there are so many incarnations of the Tomb of Horrors across the multiverse. It explains a Sarasek's thinking, why he does these things, why he builds these things. All right. And the articles, if you go back to the earlier articles from the 80s and 90s in Dungeon Magazine, especially when they, updated Tomb of Horrors or did return to Tomb of Horrors and stuff like that, they would explain a Sarasek's thinking. Why did he make this Tomb of Horrors? So in bad-mouthing Tomb of Horrors, it's because either you don't have the experience or you don't understand it, okay? So you need to understand Tomb of Horrors is not written to be part of a campaign. It's a one-shot to test characters. It's a one-shot that was run at conventions with a 2 to 3 hour time limit with pre-generated characters. You're expecting that you're probably going to get killed and maybe be playing more than one character. And then points would be divvied up. And then at the end of which you'd move on and so on, so on, so on. So every paramutation of the early Tomb of Horrors was written with that in mind. It wasn't written to be part of an adventure path like other things. Because, again, there's no reason to go there. I mean, if you read Wide Plume Mountain, the next one of the series, Wide Plume Mountain gives you a reason to go there. There's no reason to go to Tomb of Horrors. Literally none. You don't even know where it is. So they had to go back and explain it. They explained it multiple times and multiple arguments and multiple letters and multiple articles. And every time they revisited it and reprinted it, they would add a little bit more to try and explain how you might have heard of it, or more importantly, why Sarasek did what he did. Okay. So for people to claim that I'm an experienced 5e DM, then you should understand it because you at least read some of Tomb of Annihilation. And if you didn't read Tomb of Annihilation, then I completely understand why a 5th edition player wouldn't get Tomb of Horrors and would think it's the worst adventure ever written. Okay, so it's not the worst dungeon ever written. There are way worse dungeons. It is not, and again, it is a pretty deadly, but it's not the deadliest dungeon ever written, because a lot of the deadly things in Tomb of Horrors basically rely on you being dumb. If you're just smart and think about it for a second, then you probably wouldn't fall for half the traps. Let's go to the most iconic trap in Tomb of Horrors is the grinning devil's mouth, right? It's at the end of the very first hallway. It's this big giant mouth of a devil with a, like you could walk into it. It's a sphere of annihilation. Now, you and I know people have stuck their head in there. People have stuck their arm in there and lost it because either they were really, really dumb or they thought it'd be funny, But in actuality, nobody would fall for that because somebody would stick a stick in there to see, I can't see past this curtain of darkness. I'm going to stick a stick in there to see how deep the curtain of darkness goes or whatever. And when you pull back the sheared off stick, you're like, oh, hey, wow, my 10-foot pole is now 2 feet long. I'm not going to walk through there. Right? But people fell for it. And it's one of the most iconic traps. It was designed to see how stupid you were. Would you fall for this obviousness? And a lot of the other traps in there are the same. Hey, these globes, if I touch these globes, there's a really large chance that something horrible is going to happen to my character. Well, normally people would be like, I'm not going to touch that globe. It's probably dangerous. Look, I can literally see something floating inside it. But, D&D players are like, am I going to risk it for the reward? Am I going to do it because I'm playing a pre-generated character? Am I going to do it because it might be funny? So I can understand that if you haven't read Tomb of Annihilation or listened to me talk about this, you wouldn't get Tomb of Horrors and you would say it's the hardest, worst dungeon ever made. But if you have read Tomb of Annihilation, if you had read the articles, if you had seen any of my videos talking about it in the future, then you would understand actually everything about it makes sense. If you understand a Sarasek and his thinking. So, a Sarasek, the most iconic lich in D&D, is basically playing a game with the multiverse. It's explained in Tomb of Annihilations. It's explained in Return of Tomb of Horrors. He builds these tombs across the multiverse. That's why there's more than one. As tests, to test people, to test the world, to test himself. It's how he gets experience. By building these tombs, by building these traps, by seeing how well people go through them. He's kind of like Torben Bell's character from Saw, He's motivated to see if it works. And if it does work, great. And if it doesn't work, he moves on and rebuilds it and tries something else. And then the successful ones, he starts sharing with other people. Tomb of Horrors is a showroom. It's showing how clever he is. It's giving a Sarasek the chance to test other individuals in this world. Can you survive my tomb? Can you survive my traps? And then he can go and show the successful traps to other beings and go, look how successful this trap is. Would you like to buy it? Or would you like to exchange some of your secrets in exchange for me telling you how I built this trap? Which is why there are so many paramutations of Tomb of Horrors. And it even explains why there's so many knockoffs of Tomb of Horrors, like the Tomb of Death and the Tomb of Doom, and even the Doom Vaults and a lot of the other inspired by Tomb of Horror adventures. It all goes back to a Sarasek's thinking of he's basically fucking with you. He's basically fucking with the universe. He could have become a god. He chose not to. He could have become way more powerful than he is. He chooses not to. He's not like Vecna. He's not, or any of the other liches. A Sarasek is driven by his need to prove how clever he is, his need to test the universe, his need to show off to others. So he builds the Tomb of Horrors, and then he sprinkles information about it while having, paying people to perpetuate the myth that nobody knows where it is. No one's ever heard of it. Then he waits and sees. He leaves a little bit of himself in each one, the demi-lich, and then he just waits. Sooner or later, somebody explores it. He sees if they succeed or fail, i.e. going back to it was a timed tournament module. The Sarasek was testing the pre-generated characters, and the winners would move forward and then face the Sarasek again in the next incarnation of Tomb of Horrors, where he might have changed things up because he saw what didn't work, and then he tests them again. And if they succeed again, he rewards them, and then just so on and so on. He's testing himself. He's testing the heroes. He's testing the universe. And then the successful traps, he turns around and he goes and says, hey, evil, incomprehensible guy, look at this idea. I will trade you this idea that you could use in your Tomb of Doom in exchange for you teaching me some evil, incomprehensible secret that nobody else knows that I can then use to make my next series of tests. It's explained in Tomb of Annihilation. So if experienced to level 3 had actually read Tomb of Annihilations, then you would have known in all your decades of experience what Tomb of Annihilation was about and what all the permutations of Tomb of Horrors was about. And it goes back to that very first run through, and it justifies the existence of Tomb of Horrors, even though Tomb of Horrors, no one knows where it is, no one's ever been there, and no one ever comes back, and yet everybody's heard of it. It justifies that, and it justifies the original Tomb of Horrors being a tournament module where you ran pre-generated characters that you were not attached to because they knew you might die, and why it is written the way it's written. It is written as a series of tests, okay? So is it the worst dungeon ever made? Absolutely not. But I can see why people would say it's the worst dungeon ever made if they haven't actually gotten into the lore. And if you get into the lore, you get into the idea that it's a showroom, much like a, car sales room, that a Sarasak is showing off, that he's showing other interdimensional beings his cleverness, and he's testing how clever other characters of his power level are, then it makes sense. And it makes sense why people would, even though no one's ever heard about it, no one knows where it is, and no one's ever come back, people can go, oh yeah, the Tomb of Horrors. That's that place where nobody ever comes back from and no one's ever heard of. Well, if you've never heard of it, how have you heard of it? Well, that's because the Sarasak is, all right. Well, I think we've talked about 16 minutes. So hopefully maybe I have clarified a little about Tomb of Horrors. I mean, is it a great adventure? No, there are better classic adventures than Tomb of Horrors. There are more fun classic adventures of Tomb of Horrors. There are better stories in the classics than Tomb of Horrors, but it is the original tournament dungeon. It is the original fun house dungeon. It is the original you're gonna die dungeon, but that's okay because you're playing pre-generated characters, and it's not a matter of win or lose. It's a matter of, can you survive and how far can you get in this limited amount of time? Then yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's got to be okay because it's been copied and duplicated and reimagined dozens of times. Again, if you do a search on Google dungeon maps, and you're going to stumble at least 10 that are called the Tomb of something, that are obvious copies / ripoffs of Tomb of Horrors. What do you think? Am I correct? Am I incorrect? Am I just spinning my wheels and wasting time on a rainy Saturday? I don't know. You tell me. I'm your grumpy guy to all the tabletop role-playing game news, weather, and general internet nonsense. An inexperienced, uneducated West Coast grognard that is the OGGM, telling you to have a safe and happy Jewish New Year's and get out of my